Chapter 51 Lab A. "I've got it." Cos pulled 2 bottles of clear liquid off the shelf, adding it to the 3 brown bags of ammonium nitrate by the door. "This is the last ingredient." "You have everything we need?" Valentina asked. "This is it." Cos slung one of the bags over his shoulder. To Mikhail he said, "Help Nonna lift the bag." The boy got one end of the 25-pound bag and hefted. Valentina got on the other end. Together, they carried the bag out the door. Cos hefted the 2 other bags in his free arm and hurried after them. The girls had assembled in Lab A. They had burners turned on with large metal pans of water boiling. As Cos stooped to get through the doorway, machine gun chatter filled the night. Seconds later came explosions. "Our people are here," Valentina said. "I need things for measuring." Cos's mind went in several directions as he tried to calculate measurements in his head. Americans did not measure things in metric as they did in Russia. He leaned his sacks up against the wall and cut the tops open. Valentina and Mikhail added theirs to the lineup. "Valentina, can you please get the bottles of liquid I left by the door in the chemical room?" Cos asked. "Mikhail, cut open the boxes of jars. Bring me one with a lid. Amanda, get something to measure the ingredients." Mikhail dashed to the boxes they'd carried in from the jeep. Amanda hurried over to a row of drawers and began to rifle through them. Cos turned his attention to the ammonium nitrate they'd brought in from the storage room. He still didn't know what to call the materials, so he grabbed a pen off a table and labeled them 1 and 2. Then he scrawled several calculations on the bags. First, he tripled the standard measurement, then he converted everything into ounces. He wrote the corresponding measurement on each bag. All the while, gunfire continued. From the sound of things, the conflict was moving through the compound. It wasn't close to their building yet, but that could change at any time. They needed to work fast. "This is the formula." He grabbed a jar and lid they'd gotten from the hardware store. The side of the jar was printed with ounce measurements. 3 ounces of substance 1. 1 3/4 ounces of substance 2. He filled the jar as he spoke, using the scoops Amanda had put into each of the bags. "Put the lid on. Gently swirl the materials." He rotated the jar a few times, letting the chemicals mix together. "Make sure the lid is on tight. Put the jar into the boiling water until the compounds inside begin to smoke. Remove them from the heat and set aside to cool." Another loud explosion shook the ground. Cos wasn't sure what Leo and the rest of the snipers were doing, but he was grateful for every second they bought his team. "Once the materials cool, it's ready. The jar will act as bomb. Throw it. When the glass breaks, the mixture will come in contact to oxygen. It will transform into gas and render sentients unconscious." "How fast does it work?" Julie asked. "Very fast," Cos said. "When directly inhaled, it will knock out zombie in less than 30 seconds. "Come on, guys." Amanda moved down the long stainless steel table that sat in the center of the room. "Let's start an assembly line." Cos left them to it. Valentina took charge of measuring. Lena put the lids on jars and passed them to Amanda and Julie, who placed them into the boiling pans with tongs. "Mikhail," Cos said, "help me find large jars." He pointed to the cupboards that lined the room. Mikhail beelined to them and began to rummage through them. Cos went to the opposite side of the room and began to search. The gunfire gained intensity. It had moved closer to the lab where they worked. "Like this?" Mikhail held up a large jar filled with rubber bands. "Da," Cos said. See if you can find more like it. I need as many as you can find." He found 2 on a top shelf and pulled them out. He grabbed the pen he'd used to calculate his first round of measurements. There was no time to look for paper, so he used the wall. This time, he took the base formula and made it 10 times bigger. Then he began to fill the jars. Mikhail found him 2 more jars. "Do you need more?" "This is sufficient," Kaz said. "Help Lena put the lids on the jars as Nona fills them." "What are you doing?" Lena asked. "I'm helping our friends." Kaz took the first measurement and deposited the ingredient into the jar. If he executed the next part of the plan correctly, the lab would fall to the snipers this night. Chapter 52. Fire Station. Jennifer led her group into the fire station. The men on her team, Jared and Mike, fell in behind her. Cindy and Bernice brought up the rear. "Is it a good time to tell you that you're the same age as my daughter?" Mike asked. Jennifer frowned at him. "How is that relevant to what we're about to do?" He paused, staring at her. Jennifer understood what he wasn't saying. Mike's daughter had died in the invasion. "Sentient fuckers don't care about age or gender," she said. "They're ruthless. We have to be the same. We're all risking our lives for our country tonight. We're fighting for a common cause." Mike's mouth tightened as he nodded. The others made soft murmurs of agreement. They entered the fire station through a back door Cindy knew about. It was unlocked. They slipped inside. Jennifer was on high alert, her finger poised over the trigger of her gun. They found themselves in a narrow hallway. The right side of the wall was lined with small cubbies filled with slips of paper. It looked like office mailboxes. Somewhere in the compound, gunfire broke out. Seconds later, grenades went off. The battle had begun. Past the mailboxes was a large room filled with office cubicles. Jennifer gestured for Bernice and Mike to go left. She led Cindy and Jared to the right. They swept quietly between the office cubes, pausing beside the open office doors that flanked either side of the room. They reached the far side and came to another door. This one had a large glass window set into it. "This leads into the living quarters of the firemen," Cindy whispered. As soon as she said the word, pounding footsteps came from the other side of the door. Jennifer and the others immediately dropped into a crouch, staying below the window. She peeked up and glimpsed several red-eyed sentients barreling past them. "They're going out the front entrance," Cindy whispered. Jennifer waited until the last set of footsteps faded. How many had there been? She estimated at least a dozen. "We're going to come up behind them," Jennifer said. A distant part of her brain marveled that 4 full-grown adults, one of them a police officer, followed her without question. "Shoot as many of them as you can. Remember, only a headshot will kill them. And whatever you do, don't let yourself get bitten." Her plan met no argument. She grabbed the handle of the door and pushed. They rushed into the adjoining hall just as the last sentient disappeared from sight around a corner. Jennifer took the lead and rushed after him. Her heart beat hard in her chest. She could be dead in the next few minutes. She thought of Mikhail. "I'll try not to die," she said silently, wishing there was a way to get a message to him. "I'll do my best to stay alive for you." She paused at the corner and peeked around. Many of the sentients had already exited the fire station, but a handful remained in what looked like a giant living room. There was a foosball table, pinball machine, a big screen television, and no less than 3 sofas filled the room. The back of a sentient came into view. He crouched beside the double doors that led outside. She took aim and fired. Her bullet hit him in the back of the head. She stepped fully into the open and fired at the next sentient. She dropped him just as he started to turn in her direction. Then she fired past the first two at a third sentient. Her bullet clipped him in the ear as he swung around and returned fire. Mike knocked her out of the way and fired at the sentient. He managed to shoot the Soviet in the face, but yelped in pain as he took a bullet in the leg. A bullet meant for Jennifer. Damn it. She leaped over him and charged farther into the room, hoping to buy him enough time to get himself to safety. Cindy joined her. Two sentients turned to face them while the rest raced out the front door of the station. Jennifer and Cindy threw themselves behind the nearest sofa as bullets peppered the air. Bernice appeared in the doorway, firing back at the sentients before dropping out of sight. "They're behind the sofa closest to the door," Bernice called from the doorway. "Keep them distracted," Jennifer replied, fishing a grenade out of her cargo pants. "Get ready to duck." Cindy's eyes widened at the sight of the grenade. She shielded her head with her arms as Bernice began firing. Jennifer peeked around the edge of a long green leather lazy-boy sofa and located the one closest to the door. Pulling the pin and tossing the grenade, she shouted, "Now!" Then she dropped next to Cindy and covered her head. Jennifer had very little experience with grenades. This was the first time she had ever used one inside a building. As soon as it went off, she realized it had not been her best idea. The green lazy boy went to pieces. The sofa she and Cindy hid behind was knocked over by the blast. It landed on top of the two women, pinning them underneath. Pieces of wall, ceiling, and sofa rained down around them. Jennifer strained against the sofa. Her head was practically in her own crotch thanks to the heavy piece of furniture on her back. "Cindy, you okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay." "On the count of 3, let's get this thing off us. 1, 2, 3. Jennifer strained, shoving upward with her hands. Cindy did the same. The sofa flopped forward, the feet landing on the linoleum with a loud bang. Jared and Bernice rushed into the room, both of them beelining for the remains of the green lazy boy. Mike limped in after them, dragging his wounded leg. His eyes sought out Jennifer. "You okay?" She bristled at his concern. She didn't come here for a father figure. "Better than you." She regretted her harshness, but it was too late to take the words back. "He's still alive." Jared aimed at the mangled torso of a Soviet. His legs were on the other side of the room, but his arms still worked. Teeth gnashing, he attempted to drag himself toward Jared. "Take him down," Jennifer ordered. Jared clenched his jaw and fired. His first shot missed and hit the zombie in the shoulder. His second shot hit him in the head. "Nice work." Jennifer slapped him on the shoulder. All that remained of the second sentient was a bloody mess. Jennifer couldn't even see where the head was. Cindy gagged at the sight, turning away to hide her face. "Come on," Jennifer said. "We're going after the rest of them. Mike." She glanced at the man who stared at her like she was his lost child. "You'll be zombie bait with that leg wound if you're out in the open." His expression clearly said he didn't want to be left behind. She kept her face hard and impassive so he wouldn't get lost in ideas of misplaced fatherly protectiveness. "You should stay behind." "I'll cover you from the doorway," Mike said at last. "I can be helpful without getting in the way." Cindy shook. I don't know if I can do this." A few tears leaked out of her eyes. Jennifer didn't know what to say. She racked her brain, wishing she had Leo's flair for pep talks. Sudden inspiration seized her. She snapped her ankles together into a cheerleading pose. "Be aggressive," she chanted, clapping her hands together in time with her words. "Be aggressive." She spun in a tight circle. "Beagressive." More hand claps in time with the letters. "Be aggressive." She ended with a cheerleading jump, executing perfect mid-air splits. Her team gaped at her, looking at her as though she were an alien. You're a cheerleader?" Jared said dumbly. "A cheerleader who's going to help you kill fucking Soviet zombie assholes," Jennifer corrected him. "You guys gonna just stand there, or are you with me?" She turned without another word and charged out the door. Chapter 53. Battle. Jennifer exited the front door of the fire station and entered a battlefield. Humans and sentients were everywhere. Just up the street in the middle of the road, a knot of them battled. Cars were everywhere. Some were stopped in the middle of the street and empty. Others rolled through the chaos, people shouting at sentients from inside. One car had crashed into a building and caught fire. Another car was in the midst of being swarmed by Soviets. The sentients dragged people out through the open windows. No more than 20 feet away was a sentient feasting on a human. The Soviet crouched over the body, his hand buried up to the knuckles in the smashed-open head of his victim. Jennifer tightened her grip on her gun and raced into the melee. Her first target was the sentient in the middle of his feast. He was shoving a handful of brains into his mouth when she shot him in the head. She spun, looking for her next target, and found Bernice, Cindy, and Jared with her. A car rolled past them, 4 sentients spread across the roof, trunk, and hood. One of them fired through the roof of the car, trying to kill the driver. Another had a woman by the ponytail and was dragging her out the passenger side window. "Come on, we have to help them!" Jennifer sprinted after the car. She fired at the closest sentient, a bastard crouched on the trunk who was smashing his fists against the back window. The car swerved off the road and plowed through a row of hedges. Her bullet clipped the side of the roof, completely missing the sentient. A loud bang reverberated through the battlefield as the car crashed into a lamppost. The front hood crumpled on impact. One sentient was thrown through the air. He disappeared from sight as he hit the ground behind a knot of battling humans and Soviets. Jennifer charged for the sentient who was still trying to drag a woman out of the car by her ponytail. That he'd managed to maintain his position on top of the car was nothing short of amazing. "Help me!" the woman screamed as she caught sight of Jennifer. "Help, please!" The sentient's head snapped up. Jennifer froze. Red eyes glared at her from a face that looked almost exactly like her father's. It wasn't her father, she knew that, but it could have been his Russian twin. The slope of his nose, the angle of his cheekbones, the shape of his jaw, and even the light brown color of his hair. She was sucked back through time, back to her childhood bedroom. Her father's figure filled the doorway, except it wasn't her father she saw, but the glaring red eyes of the sentient. The blood-smeared teeth grinned at her, promising pain of the worst kind. Old terror rose inside her, the terror of feeling trapped in her own room. Helplessness made it difficult to breathe. Even when the sentient released the woman's ponytail and shifted his stance, clearly intending to spring for her, she couldn't move. A distant part of her mind screamed at her, desperate to be heard. "Shoot him! Shoot him before he tackles you!" But that part of her brain was tiny and compressed, barely a blip in the wake of the hot blaze of childhood terror. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She wanted to flee, to run down the stairs and away from the monster, but she couldn't move. The sentient sprang. Jennifer could only stand there, staring at the monster who came for her. Right before the sentient collided with her, something smacked hard into her side. She was thrown through the air. Asphalt came up to meet her. Pain ripped up her left shoulder, and her uniform sleeve was torn on impact. She rolled gracelessly across the ground, panting as she came to a stop. A bellow of pain brought her surging to her knees. Mike lay on the ground, right where she had been. Crouched on top of him was the sentient who had come for her. Mike had knocked her out of the way. He had saved her life. "You're the same age as my daughter." Everything happened so fast. Jennifer swiped at her gun with sweaty hands. The sentient swung a heavy wrench. Mike screamed as it connected with the front of his skull. Blood splattered into the night. The sentient smiled as he yanked the wrench out of Mike's battered head. She needed to do something. Run. Shoot. Hell, even screaming would be better than nothing. But seeing the smile on the face that looked so much like her father's made her heart beat fast and welded her feet to the ground. It was like seeing a nightmare in the flesh, only bigger and more terrifying than she had ever realized. "Jennifer!" Bernice and Cindy ran up to her, pulling her back from Mike and the zombie. "You can't do anything for him," Bernice said. "Come on, we have to—" 4 sentients materialized out of the chaos. They sprinted toward the women, moving with eerie speed. The 5th sentient, the one who looked like her dad and feasted on Mike, was lost from sight. A switch flipped in her brain. She abruptly remembered who she was. She was Jennifer Miola, a grown woman, and she didn't take shit from anyone. Not her father, and certainly not an asshole who looked like her father. The old terror of her childhood receded. She returned to herself. Her focus snapped into place as the 4 sentients closed in around them. She brought up her gun and fired at the closest of them. The sentient jumped, body soaring higher than a regular human body ever could. Her bullets took him in the hip instead of the head. He landed in a crouch, blood streaming from the wound. More blood coated his mouth and jaw. It glistened on his hand as it curled into a fist around a hammer. He smiled at her, and Jennifer saw her own death in his eyes. Chapter 54. Life. The smell of burning rubber filled Caz's nostrils as he drove the Jeep through the lab compound. He cursed his lack of a map as he rounded a corner and found himself faced with a dead end. Snarling in frustration, he threw the Jeep into reverse and tore back down the narrow street. Tires squealed as he zoomed back into the intersection and hit the brakes. His gaze pinned on the plume of smoke rising into the sky. It was somewhere near the center of the compound. That's where the main battle raged. That's where he had to go. He took the next right and sped down the road. At the next intersection, he followed the plume of smoke and turned left. One of the propane tanks in the bank clanked as it rolled with the turn. The sound of gunfire grew louder. He was close to the battle. He could feel it. This was it. The moment of reckoning. His first of many strikes against those who had killed his family and many other innocents. He took the next turn right and abruptly found himself in the middle of the battlefield. People and sentients were everywhere. Cars crammed the road, some of them moving, some of them crashed and abandoned. Dead humans, dead sentients, and knots of battles were everywhere. Half a block down, fire raged. The back end of a car struck out from the crumpled side of a building. The engine had caught fire in the crash. It was perfect. Caz set his sights on the burning building and drove straight through the melee. He hunched down behind the steering wheel, doing his best to make himself a small target. Bullets zinged through the air. One cracked his front windshield. He sped up, worried one of the propane tanks would be hit while he was still in the car. Beside him on the passenger seat were the 4 large jars of sleeping gas he'd mixed. A knot of battling humans and sentients boiled in front of the Jeep. Caz jerked the steering wheel and drove up onto the sidewalk. The bottom of the Jeep scraped against a small hedge that grew between the sidewalk and the grass in front of the building. The door to the building opened. 3 figures hurried down the steps. The headlight beams illuminated 3 Soviet uniforms. Pins of rank flashed on the breast of the man in the middle. Kaz felt his heart skip. He hit the brakes without meaning to. His eyes stuck on the glinting military pins. He traced the profile of the man who wore them. The large gut, sagging jowls, and thinning hair were unmistakable. The man hadn't always looked like that. There had been a time when he'd been fit and trim with gleaming hair. Time and age had weathered him into the man who now rushed past Kaz without seeing him. Petrov. It was General Petrov, the man Kaz hated more than anyone else in the world. He slipped out of the headlight beams and into a car that sat in front of the building. It was a nondescript burgundy vehicle with 4 doors. By the time Kaz's brain started working, the red tail lights of the car flared to life. It rolled forward. To his horror, Kaz realized General Petrov was evacuating. He was trying to escape. "No," he growled. His feet went down on the accelerator. The Jeep leaped forward. "You're not getting away, you fucking bastard!" No way was he going to allow Petrov to slip out of the lab under the cover of battle. The man was not going to escape, not if Kaz had anything to say about it. He would chase Petrov to the end of the earth if he had to. He would... "Kaz, Jennifer is in trouble." Kaz did a double take as Mikhail climbed out from beneath the tarps covering the propane tanks. The boy slid into the front seat, gesturing wildly with his hands. "Jennifer, Kaz, look, she's in trouble." He tore his eyes from the red tail lights of Petrov's car and followed Mikhail's pointing finger. Sure enough, there was Jennifer. She stood in the road near a car that had crashed into a lamppost. She stood back to back with 2 women, one of them a tall black woman, the other a light-haired woman in clothes that had once been tailored. For sentience closed in on the women. Kaz hit the brakes a second time. Conflict made his knuckles white around the steering wheel. His eyes flicked back and forth between Jennifer and the receding taillights of Petrov's getaway car. Jennifer. Petrov. Jennifer. Petrov. Indecision froze Kaz in place as the seconds ticked by. "Jennifer!" Mikhail leaped out of the car and charged into the fray. His yellow and black shirt was a bright streak amidst the chaos. He dashed to where Jennifer stood, calling her name. "Jennifer! Jennifer!" He scooped up a discarded gun off the ground and continued to race toward her. Time elongated. Everything around Kaz moved in slow motion as his eyes locked on Mikhail's tattered B-shirt. Polina. When she had first sent him the honeybee, it had been to save his life. When she sent it a second time, it had been to save Mikhail's life. And when she had sent it the third time, it had been to save Julie and the snipers. And here she was again. Kaz knew it in his heart. His wife was right beside him. The smell of her soap was more pungent than the smoke that filled the air. "Polina," he whispered, "help me." And like a clap of thunder, he understood what his wife was trying to tell him. The world sped back into motion. Sound crashed in around him. The smell of battle hit his nostrils. Smoke and fire mixed with the sharp tang of gunfire and blood. Polina didn't care about vengeance. She didn't care about Petrov. All his Polina wanted was for him to save lives. The best way for him to earn redemption, the only way, was to save lives, not end them. And the best way to save Jennifer and many others was to set off his smoke bombs. "I understand, my heart. I understand." Kaz dismissed Petrov from his mind and set his sights on the burning building. He hit the accelerator, driving straight for it. The liquid smoke bomb sloshed in the seat next to him. The Jeep plowed through another row of hedges, leaped off the curb, and hit the street. Cause rammed one of the sentients closing in on Jennifer, sending the man flying. He connected with the side of the building in a bloody smear and slid to the ground. There wasn't time to see if he was still alive. Cause kept driving. Jennifer's wide eyes met his for a brief second. Then Cause was speeding away, all his attention on the burning building. The Jeep leaped up the second curb as he drove up onto the grass. He sped up and threw open the driver's side door. Time to save lives. Right before the Jeep collided with the fire, Cause leaped free. He rolled roughly across the ground and smacked into the side of the building. Scrambling to his feet, he broke into a run right as the Jeep plowed into the flames. He picked up speed, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the Jeep filled with no less than 10 propane tanks. The explosion hit him from behind. Chapter 55. Nightmare. Jennifer met Cause's eyes for a brief second before the melee swallowed him whole. He had eliminated one of the 4 sentients, but that still left 3 of them. Behind her, Bernice and Cindy were both screaming. She felt them moving against her back, heard the chatter of their machine guns, but she only had eyes for the sentient who came for her. He raised his hammer, preparing to throw it at her. He released the hammer. Jennifer had 2 choices. She could fire at the sentient and risk being struck, or she could use the gun to deflect the hammer. Survival instinct kicked in. She brought the gun up defensively in front of her, barely managing to knock the hammer aside. It scraped painfully against her knuckles. The sentient leaped for her. A small form in a tattered yellow and black shirt raced in between her and the oncoming sentient. Little Mikhail screamed in defiance. He gripped a machine gun in his hands and fired. The force of the recoil threw him back on his butt. Bullets ripped up the front of the sentient's chest, but missed his head. It was enough to slow him down. The sentient reeled from the attack, fingers clawing at the blood that welled from his wounds. It was the opening Jennifer needed. She leaped over Mikhail and fired right into the sentient's face. "Jennifer!" She turned as Mikhail ran to her. He barreled into her arms, flinging his arms around her waist. Tears rushed to her eyes. "Are you okay?" She crushed him in a hug. "You aren't hurt, are you? Is this your first time firing a gun?" He could have hurt himself. He replied to her in rapid Russian. She caught the word Kozlovovich as he gestured wildly with his hands. "Kozlovovich," he said again, another long string of Russian following the name. "Kozlovovich!" "What are you trying to tell me? Is Koz in trouble?" she asked. "Is he?" A huge explosion rent the air. Jennifer had only an instant to see that it came from the direction of the car that had crashed into the building and started the fire. She threw herself over Mikhail as chunks of metal and sheetrock shot outward in the blast. She squeezed him tightly in her arms, pinning him to the ground. A heavy piece of shrapnel bounced against her back. She gasped in pain, arms cinching even more tightly around Mikhail. She held on to him as tears leaked out of her eyes. Why was she crying? She had no idea. Her mind's eye kept seeing the way Mikhail had leaped between her and the sentient, the way he had fired that gun and risked his own life to save her. He'd been so fierce, so determined, so powerful despite his smallness. "You're beautiful," she murmured into him. Her tears soaked the back of his striped shirt. "You're so goddamn beautiful, you little shit. So goddamn beautiful." She tried to say more, but her words were lost in a sob. She held on to Mikhail like her life depended on it. Chapter 56. Asleep. Koz picked himself off the ground, wrapping his elbow around his nose to protect himself from the smoke. A piece of metal stuck out from his leg. It looked like a piece of the Jeep. He limped away from the fire that quickly spread, eating up the building where he had sent the propane tanks to explode. Mixed with the smoke of the fire was another scent. It was subtle, but Kaz had worked with it enough over the years to recognize the sleeping gas that would neutralize zombies. It was a slightly rotten, acrid smell, almost like overripe fruit. It rolled over the battlefield as smoke billowed up and out. He limped onto the road and paused long enough to wrench the shrapnel from his leg. Valentina would need to give him stitches. Suddenly exhausted, he sat on a curb across from the flames. "I did it, Paulina." He had chosen to save lives, as she had wanted. Warm satisfaction mixed with deep fatigue. The first thick wave of smoke hit a battling knot of humans and sentients. As soon as the gas rolled over the sentients, they swayed on their feet. They waved hands in front of their faces as though the gesture could dispel the smoke. Within seconds, they were unconscious on the ground. One by one, all across the battlefield, sentients passed out. They dropped wherever they stood. Weapons clattered to the ground. Only the snipers understood what was happening. From somewhere across the battlefield, Anton gave a great whoop. Kaz couldn't see him through the smoke and darkness, but his voice was unmistakable. "The sentients are going down," Anton crowed. "Fucking communist zombie bastards are going down. This is the secret fucking weapon, people. We are taking back our country." Anton materialized out of the smoke. Somewhere between here and West County, he'd lost his limp. His scarred face made him look like the seasoned warrior he was. He raised his gun into the air. "Long live the red, white, and blue, motherfuckers!" Anton fired his gun a few times into the air. "Let's go kill us some zombie bastards!" He emphasized this point by firing into the head of a prone sentient on the ground. Stirred by Anton's words, the crowd began to move. Guns went off as people shot unconscious sentients. Kaz scanned the area looking for Jennifer and Mikhail. Were they safe? Had he detonated the gas in time to save them? Mikhail's vibrant shirt caught his eye. The boy was alive and in one piece, as was Jennifer. She stood with Mikhail. They shifted in and out of sight as people and smoke drifted in front of Kaz. They were safe. Kaz let out a long exhalation. He detonated the bomb in time. He searched inside himself as he watched Americans kill his former countrymen. He looked for remorse or regret, anything to indicate he'd done the wrong thing. All he felt was peace. Yes, his actions were causing the death of sentients, but sentient zombies were an aberration. They could not be allowed to spread, or all of humanity would be lost. He had done the right thing. He saw Paulina's smile clearly in his mind. It was her big one, the one that went from the corners of her mouth all the way up to her eyes. And he heard her say, "Well done, my heart." It may have been his imagination, but he felt it so strongly in his heart that he started to cry. Chapter 57. Wrench. Cindy was dead. Bernice was still alive, though nursing an arm that had been badly injured from a wrench when a sentient tried to club her. Jared was unaccounted for. All around Jennifer were unconscious sentients. People ran through the streets, shooting them in the head. It didn't matter if a sentient had already been shot. People shot the same body multiple times. Anton stood in the middle of everything. He'd climbed onto the hood of the car with an American flag. Where he'd found it, Jennifer had no idea. Anton held the flag in both hands, shouting to the people, "Kill those fuckers! That's right, just shoot 'em in the head. No fucking mercy. You hear me? The sniper sacrificed everything to be here tonight. Our Russian ally made all this possible. We are going to take our country back. We are going to make more of these fucking gas bombs and take out the sentients. It's going to be like this in every state. I fucking survived a KGB torture chamber to be here with all of you tonight." Anton's words moved the people. Hope painted their faces. Whoops of triumph went up. Guns continued to go off as more unconscious sentients were killed. Jennifer hadn't heard him talk this much since before the war. It was good to see a little of the old Anton. Although if Nona was anywhere, she'd probably throw a shoe at him for all his foul language. "Jen?" Footsteps pounded behind her. Someone grabbed her by the shoulder and spun her around. "Jen!" Leo stood in front of her, hands resting on her shoulders as he looked her up and down. His face was streaked with soot and spattered with blood. "I'm okay. You?" She scanned his body, searching for wounds. "I'm okay." His shoulders dropped with relief as his hands fell away. "I was almost overrun, but Kaz came through just in time." "For me too." She glanced at Anton. "I think your brother has a new calling. We need to get him on the radio waves with Dal. We found a tower a few streets over. We're getting the word out as soon as we can." It almost felt like being back at the Giacchino cabin. Almost. "Leo, can you watch me, Kyle, for a second, please? I need to do something." Her lips compressed into a hard line as she glanced at the unconscious sentient who had killed Mike. The man barely knew her, and yet he sacrificed himself to save her because she reminded him of his daughter. It was more than her own father would have ever done. "I can watch him," Leo said. "Where are you going?" Jennifer didn't answer. "Make sure he doesn't watch, okay?" She approached the bodies, forcing herself to look at Mike's smashed head. She tried to picture his face superimposed on the bloody mess, but found it impossible. Her mind held no firm memory of Mike. She'd known him for less than an hour. He'd ridden in the back seat of her Volvo. He'd followed her into battle, yet she'd never had the chance to properly absorb his features. All she carried was a hazy impression of shaggy, dark hair laced with gray. It would have to be enough. Holding on to the memory of his hair and indistinct features, she picked up the gore-coated wrench. Pieces of Mike were stuck all over the rusted metal. Drawing in a long breath, she forced herself to face the unconscious sentient. He was flat on his stomach, a lumpy mass of brains still gripped in one hand. He'd been in the middle of eating Mike when Kaz's sleeping gas knocked him out. She pressed a bloody tennis shoe to his ribcage and flipped him over. The blood-smeared face didn't just resemble her father. It looked like his doppelganger. The old fear stole up her spine. Jennifer ground her teeth and clenched the wrench between both hands, fighting emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Mikhail had faced death to save her. He had more courage than she'd ever had. She'd almost died today because she'd been too frightened to defend herself. "It ends today," she told herself. She would be brave and fierce like Mikhail. With a scream, she brought the wrench down on the sentient's face. The cheekbones shattered beneath the blow. The wrench came down again, this time smashing his nose and part of the eye socket. A scream burst from her throat. It went on and on and on. Jennifer couldn't have stopped if she tried. She beat the sentient's face until it was a pulpy mess. It was more than enough, but adrenaline hammered in her temples. She was still screaming. Her body moved of its own accord. The wrench came down on the sentient's chest. Time stretched. It was just her father, the wrench, years of pent-up rage and terror finally gushing out of her. When it was over, Jennifer stared at what she had done. She was too exhausted to feel anything more than relief. She could sleep for a week. The wrench fell from her fingers. She turned to where she had left Mikhail with Leo. True to his word, Leo had the little boy sheltered from her. He held him firmly against his chest, not letting him look even when Mikhail struggled. As Jennifer crossed to them, Leo finally released the boy. "Jennifer!" Mikhail ran to her. She caught him in a fierce hug. Her eyes met Leo's as she squeezed Mikhail tight. Leo stared back at her as though seeing a stranger. She was too exhausted to deflect him with a snarky or rude comment. All she could do was hold Mikhail and feel grateful that he was alive and strong. Chapter 58. Survivors. Jennifer stood in the window of the fire station. The tall two-story building was smudged with soot from the fire that had burned down 2 buildings before they'd managed to put it out. If there hadn't been a fire station in the compound, they would have lost a lot more, possibly the entire Livermore lab. A ladder leaned up against the outside wall of the fire station. Stretched out from the ladder was a long line of people. More people gathered beneath the ladder, all of them standing against the wall with black Sharpies in hand. Someone had found a supply closet and passed out several boxes of pens. On the wall were names, dozens of names. There would be hundreds before the day was through. It had been Leo's idea to recreate a wall of not forgotten in the lab compound. The survivors needed a place to remember the lost. Yet another reason why Leo was such a good leader. He had a heart. He knew what people needed. She should write Cindy's name on that wall. And Mike's. Their names needed to be remembered. But she would do it later when there weren't so many people. She didn't feel like dealing with a crowd this morning. "Jen?" She turned to find Leo regarding her from beside the foosball table. The snipers had taken up residence in the fire station. His wet hair curled around his ears, telling her he'd just showered. They hadn't spoken since the incident with the wrench. She suspected he'd been avoiding her, but it was hard to be certain. Leo was literally the most popular man on campus. Again. In high school, he'd been popular for his good looks and his prowess on the football field. In war, he was popular because he gave people hope. "Hey, Leo." She gave him a tired smile. She'd been promising herself a shower for the past 24 hours, yet somehow still hadn't made it happen. At least she'd gotten Mikhail to wash. That was more important anyway. "How you doing?" Leo crossed the room to stand beside her at the window. "I'm okay. How about you?" She searched his face. Fatigue pinched the skin around his eyes and mouth. "You look like you could use a nap." He barked a laugh. "I feel like I could sleep for a week straight." "Me too," she smiled. "Let me guess. There's no chance of a proper night's sleep until the war is over?" "Yeah." He ran a hand through her shaggy hair, a familiar, unconscious gesture that warmed her. "Jen." "What?" She braced herself for what she knew was coming. His eyes darted to her face before he looked back out the window to the line of people standing before the wall of not forgotten. "That sentient you killed, when you had me watch Mikhail, he looked like—" He trailed off, once again looking at her. Jennifer's heart fluttered with dread. She swallowed but forced herself not to look away. She wasn't going to say it for him, but she wasn't going to run from him either. "Did something happen with your dad?" Leo blurted. He shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "Did he do something to you?" He swallowed, but his eyes never left her face. Jennifer closed her eyes. Did something happen with your dad? Dread melted away. Replacing it was exhaustion, bone-deep exhaustion she realized she'd been carrying around for years. When she opened her eyes again, she didn't feel afraid. She felt like she was Mikhail taking on a bigger and stronger enemy. When she looked at Leo, she felt brave for the first time since she'd known him. Yeah, Leo, lots of things happened with my dad. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Leo understood. She saw in the way his eyes rounded with shock, in the way his bottom lip sagged open with sorrow. I didn't know. No one knew, Leo. She reached out and took his hand. Was it odd that she wanted to comfort him? I never told you, but you saved me from him. I did? His brow furrowed in confusion. She waited for a night when Cassie went to Amanda's for a sleepover. When Dad came into her room, she switched on the nightstand lamp and pulled the portable phone out from under her covers. She made eye contact as she hit the on button. The soft hum of the receiver filled the space between them. Come any closer, and I'll call 911, she said flatly. Terror hammered in her veins, but she clung to the memory of Leo and his love. She only wanted to be touched by someone who looked at her the way Leo looked at her. You don't want to do that, honey, Dad said. No, I don't, she replied. But it's what I'll do if you come any closer. You're not allowed in my room ever again. Sweetie. He took a step forward. Jennifer jammed her finger down on the number 9. The blare of the button made her heart pound. She was terrified of what would happen if people found out what her dad was doing to her. She didn't want anyone to know. She didn't want to imagine the looks on Cassie and her mom's face if they found out. But the idea of people knowing was less scary than the idea of letting him come 1 inch closer. I'll do it. Jennifer shifted onto her knees, ready to make a run for it if he tried to come for her. She glared at him, fighting back the tears of fear that built up behind her eyes. Don't make me do it, Dad. Honey. She slammed her finger down on the number 1. Her heart beat so hard her head swam. She worried she might faint. What would happen if she fainted? What would he do to her? Her breaths came short and fast. Blood pounded in her temples. She couldn't let him get the upper hand. Never again. Her finger tensed, ready to slam down on the number 1 a second time. Her dad must have seen the resolution in her eyes. He held up his hands and took a step back. Fine, he snapped. Get out, she snarled. Don't ever come in here again, ever. He glared at her, but his feet moved backwards. When they crossed the threshold of her door, she said, If you ever lay a finger on Cassie, I'll know. I'll make sure you rot in a jail cell for the rest of your life. I mean it, Dad. He left without another word. Jennifer closed her door. With tears streaming down her face, she shoved the dresser in front of it. Then she curled up on the bed and cried herself to sleep. A tremor went through Jennifer's fingers as she gripped Leo's hands. Do you remember the first time we slept together in the apple orchard? In the back of my truck, he nodded, eyes going distant at the memory. I had bruises on my knees from the truck bed. A strange sound bubbled up from Jennifer's throat. It took her a second to realize it was laughter. You never told me that. Please. Like the great Leo Cecchino would have admitted to having bruises on his knees from losing his virginity in the back of his truck. I felt like an amateur. Technically, you were an amateur. This time he laughed. Then they laughed together, sharing a smile that warmed Jennifer all the way to her toes. Her courage flared. It was being with you that made me realize just how fucked up things were with my dad. It gave me the courage. Her breath caught as emotion tightened her chest and threatened to make her cry. When a tear leaked out of one eye, she decided to let it go. You showed me what it was supposed to be like, Leo. My dad never touched me after that night with you. More tears slid out of her eyes. She blinked, but forced herself to let Leo see her. She owed him that much. You fought him? Leo asked. Yeah, with a telephone. What about Cassie? Leo's hand came up to brush the black knight pendant he wore from a string around his neck. That had been Cassie's favorite chess piece. Did he? Never. Jennifer's voice was fierce. He never touched her. I would have killed him. I think he knew it. After we were together, I threatened to call the cops if he ever touched me again. I told him I'd do the same if he ever so much as looked wrong at Cassie. I protected her, Leo. It's why... She paused to swallow and gather herself. It's why it took me so long to fight back. I was afraid he'd hurt Cassie instead. The lie felt heavy in her chest. Leo deserved better. She licked her lips and said, No, that's not true. I mean, it is. I did want to protect Cassie, but I was... Her voice dropped to a whisper. I was scared, Leo. I was so scared of him. A shudder went through her. More tears gushed from her eyes. But I did fight him. I did. Finally, after you and I were together, you showed me how it was supposed to be between two people. She wanted to hide, but she didn't. She forced herself to look into his eyes, to see what he thought of her now that he knew the truth. You're so strong, Jennifer. He raised a hand to her cheek, a gentle thumb wiping at her tears. I'm sorry that happened to you. His eyes were warm and sad when he smiled at her. Another shudder went through her. She felt like a rag doll popping apart at the seams, all the careful stitching finally wearing away under years of pressure. She began to cry. Big, crushing sobs that broke from her chest. Leo pulled her into a hug, arms cradling her while she cried into his shirt. He didn't speak, didn't try to soothe her with meaningless words. He just held her and let her cry. It was like being seen for the first time in her life. Epilogue. Black Night. After securing the lab, Leo led the people back into the town of Livermore. Armed with several hundred gas bombs made in glass jars, they attacked what remained of the downtown headquarters. Within the day, they cleared Livermore of the Soviets. They had found Milo's tank. It was a burned-out husk. A small part of Jennifer hoped the crazy man would still be alive, but they'd found the remains of his body inside. There were no signs of his mutants. Jennifer guessed they were either dead or had fled. Anton had taken it upon himself to spread the story of Milo's sacrifice. Many people had returned to the Livermore lab with the snipers, more than they had left with. Big groups came with kids and grandparents. More people showed up asking to join the snipers and be a part of the fight. Everyone wanted to be in the compound. The firehouse was large enough for the West County snipers, but the lab was not set up to house several hundred people. Nona had taken charge of organizing everyone. She sent out scavenging teams to bring back blankets, sleeping bags, and mattresses. She assigned sleeping quarters and kept a roster. Dell's focus became the radio tower in the lab compound. He and Anton shared the mic. Anton relayed the story of the snipers, telling the world how they had the secret to killing sentient zombies. He left out the small fact they had a Russian ally, something Kaz had insisted on. "My superior is still out there," he said. "If he finds out I am with the snipers, he will guess what our weapon is." It was enough for people to know there was a way to fight back, that there was hope they could win their country back. Dal invited people to travel to Livermore. He asked for everyone who wanted to join the fight to come to Livermore. Kaz, Amanda, and Julie took charge of bomb production. Many of the people who came to the lab had been former employees. Several scientists stepped forward to help the production team. They knew their way around the equipment, and soon the group was making real bombs in metal canisters. It wasn't long before they had a hefty stockpile. Lena set up a recruitment center where people could sign up to be a sniper and join the resistance. Once someone signed up to be a sniper, Leo took charge of organizing them. His first order of business was fortifying the lab's perimeter defenses. The chain-link fence wasn't enough. A new recruit had worked at a nearby storage facility. With his help, Leo had portable storage units brought in and set up around the lab. The great metal boxes served as the wall. He created a guard rotation. Soon, patrols had been seen on top of the containers at all hours of the day. Spill and Bruce created scavenging teams. They led groups out into Livermore to look for survivors and gather supplies. They came back every day with more and more of the things needed by a small community. Everything from toiletries to clothing to food. Jennifer had set up a training camp for all new snipers. Chop Shop picked up where Milo had left off, teaching hand-to-hand combat. She made sure everyone knew they could bring their children to combat practice. She attended every day with Mikhail. Once people saw him training, others began to bring their kids. Soon, they had groups of kids and teenagers training every day. Day by day, the community grew and strengthened. What started as a small resistance group in the Chiquino cabin morphed into something else. When Jennifer paused to look back on what they were building, she saw hope. There was no telling what tomorrow would bring, but for today, hope was enough. Jennifer walked hand in hand with Mikhail back to the fire station after combat practice. He was wound up from today's lesson, where he'd managed to get the upper hand on an older boy who had at least 20 pounds on him. He talked non-stop, his Russian mixed with a few English words. When they reached the firehouse, Jennifer planted a kiss on his head. Then she put one hand on her hip and raised a brow at him, speaking one word. "Shower." Mikhail scowled and made a sound of disgust that was neither Russian nor English, though perfectly understandable to everyone. Kaz chuckled from where he sat on the sofa, eating a sandwich. "Lunch break?" Jennifer asked, heading to the kitchen that was attached to the big family room.
"I have decided that I very much like tuna,"
Kaz replied.
"Lena makes a very good tuna sandwich."
"Lucky for you, Bruce's team brought back several dozen cases of canned tuna," Jennifer said. "You're probably going to get sick of it."
"Doubtful," Kaz said. "What is this white binding agent?"
He peeled back 2 pieces of bread, peering at the mashed mixture inside. "Mayonnaise. Don't you guys have mayo in Russia?"
"My Polina made something like it, but the flavor is not the same."
Kaz pressed the slices of bread back together and tossed the rest of the sandwich into his mouth. "Mikhail likes it too."
"I think he would eat metal fork if you tried to feed it to him."
Jennifer snickered. It was true. Mikhail ate everything. He ate so fast, she was pretty sure he didn't taste anything before it went down his throat. She made 2 tuna sandwiches. The bread was stale, but who cared? Once she toasted it, She didn't even notice.
We must speak about your language, Ka said. Mikhail picks up bad words from you.
Jennifer snorted. All kids pick up bad words.
It is not proper.
We can clean up his language when the war is over. How's that?
Then you must answer to Valentina Cecchino the next time he says fucker in front of her.
Jennifer couldn't help it. She burst out laughing. He said that in front of her?
Yes.
He gave her a severe frown.
I had to pretend it was a Russian word.
Jennifer laughed harder. After a moment, Kaz joined her. He had a big chuckle that made his whole body shake with mirth. They grinned at each other. It felt good to laugh. "How is Polina?" she asked as their mirth faded, glancing at the doorway that led to the sleeping quarters as she waited for Mikhail to return from his shower. "Has she brought any more bees to you?"
Bees? No. But she is with me every day.
"Have you proven that scientifically?" When Kaz scowled at her, she said, "Well, you are a scientist."
Yes, I am scientist. But this war has taught me that there is truth beyond science.
Is that a fancy way of saying you believe Polina is here, but you can't actually prove it? Kaz put a hand over his chest, face solemn.
I feel her here.
His large hand patted his heart.
My wife is with me. I know it for certain.
Jennifer felt a little deflated, like someone had given Kaz a gift she could never hope to have. She would give anything to have his certainty.
And how about you? Kaz asked. What of your sister?
What about her? Jennifer poked at her sandwich. It didn't look as appetizing as it had a few minutes ago. What was taking Mikhail so long anyway?
Do you not feel her in your heart?
Jennifer opened her mouth to answer. No, I don't feel her. Cassie is gone, end of story. But the words never came out, because at the moment, Mikhail came back from showering. Beadlets of water dripped from the end of his hair, making small rivulets across his nose and cheeks. He'd put on a clean pair of clothes. There was a nice change of pace. Half the time, she had to wheedle him into clean clothes. Why he liked to wear his dirty ones was beyond her. Maybe Leo could shed some insight into the strange minds of little boys for her. "Jennifer!" Mikhail crossed the room to where she sat on the sofa with Kaz. In his left arm was a small rectangular box that rattled when he moved. It was a game box, Jennifer realized. "I made you lunch." She held up the plate and smiled. For once, Mikhail didn't seem the least bit interested in food. "Play?" He set the box down on the coffee table. That's when Jennifer realized it was a chess set. It was the pieces that rattled inside the box. "Play?" Mikhail said again, then spoke several rapid sentences in Russian.
His parents used to play with him, Kaz smiled. He'd like to play with you, Jennifer.
"Play?" Mikhail extended his hand to Jennifer and opened his palm. "Please, play?" "Sure, I'll play, but I should warn you that I'm no expert. That was my sister's area of expert—" Jennifer's words died on her tongue. Nestled in Mikhail's palm, angled so that Jennifer could see it perfectly, was a chess piece. It was a black knight, Cassie's favorite piece. This has been Sentience, Zommunist Invasion Book 4, written by Camille Picott, performed by Al Kessel. Audio copyright 2022 by Camille Picott, all rights reserved. Reproduction of this content without prior authorization will result in swift annihilation. Discover the origin of Cause, the man who helped make the Nejit virus. Join our newsletter and receive your free Zommunist Invasion origin story. Visit www.camillepicott.com to sign up. That's CamillePicott.com.